Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. So I will start by just sharing a bit about the work that I do, and then highlight something that I think is important when thinking about doing this work with graduate students, or approaches that graduate students can consider when doing this work. A bit about my work is I study the effects of race-related stressors on the mental health of Black adolescents and other youth of color. And in particular, I'm really interested in understanding what are factors that can help youth manage race-related stressors and cope in a positive or adaptive way when managing race-related stress, right? And so a piece of that for me is thinking about ethnic racial socialization, and that is essentially how youth learn about race, also how they prepare for and manage race-related stress and bias, and then also, what are ways that they can develop pride and learn about the history and their culture of their group and develop pride. So I'm very interested in racial socialization as well as other culturally relevant practices that can help promote positive outcomes for youth, again, with that focus on mental health, adjustment, and then overall resilience. A part of this work does involve community-based interaction for me. And so a lot of my work to date has been partnering with families, with schools, or with community-based organizations to do this research, right? And so a part of my training as a clinical community psychologist was not only in developing good research skills and also clinical skills to provide therapy to families and youth, but it was also very much grounded in this community psychology approach. And a part of that is thinking about the supporting the communities in which we work with, right? Because in this work, most of us are having personal interactions with individuals, whether it is a large scale kind of community level approach that you might be taking to your work, or if you're working with an individual that is a part of several communities, inherently there are ways that you are impacting that individual through your work or a larger community, depending on the scope and lens of the approach you take with your research. And so for me, it is really important to think not just about what are my interests and my research goals. Of course, that has to be a priority when you're in graduate school, and even at the professoriate level. You have areas that you care about and that you're interested in, but in addition to that, you can think about what are ways that my work can help serve this community. And so I try to take that approach when I'm doing my research. So when I approach a community partner or a family or a school, I say, here's my area of expertise. This is what I study. Can you help me understand, where the needs are in regards to your organization or your school? And so that can help me kind of adjust and think about ways I can support the community partners that I'm working with. And so in terms of advice for graduate students, I would say that one piece of it is, start thinking about projects. If you care about community-based research, start thinking about if there's an opportunity to develop your own project. What are projects that would allow you to have interactions that would be more community-based on the ground research, right? So if you have that opportunity as opposed to secondary data analysis, try to take advantage of that. A part of it might, if you don't have a community, a course within your department or at your school, or that's accessible to you, that kind of gives you the foundational skills for that. It does take a little bit of legwork in terms of researching some of that information. And I'm sure we'll be able to provide you with resources and suggestions today, but I would say try to go for those opportunities and find ways to center community voices in your work. So I'll pause there just to make sure that I'm not taking up too much time on this front end, because I know we're going to get into other great questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Salim. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Springfield.
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you so much for talking about your research, Dr. Salim. We have, I think, some connection. So it's great to be on a panel with you and others. So my research focuses on understanding and improving diet quality in young African-American women through culturally tailored interventions. And I'm gonna be a little more personal in the story about how I conducted this work. So I started this work in graduate school. I did my doctorate at UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, right? So I'm actually from the Bay Area. I'm from Northern California, but in right, thank you, Valerie. But in graduate school, Chicago was just a great place to learn. I call Chicago the good, bad, and the ugly, right? It's like, it was a great place to learn about health disparities and health inequities and kind of that context, that cultural social context that shapes our health behaviors. And that was stemming, like I said, first from my personal experience of just transitioning across the country. So at UIC, I was in a nutrition and health equity lab, and we focused on food as a social determinant of health. And I was a part of several lifestyle interventions that were conducted in different environments. So community-based, well, first university-based. We did interventions for Black women that was university-based. And then that intervention was adapted to the community, to a low-income community in Chicago called Inglewood. It's at this point, I think a famous place. I don't know how familiar you are with hip hop and so forth and so on. But yeah, I did the intervention adapted there, and then and then several other ones in different subpopulations of Black folks. This first one was low income Black women. And just during the course, I was a research assistant on the project. So, and it was conducted with the CBPR approach. So during the course of that intervention, you just heard so many things that were affecting women's diet and physical activity, kind of lifestyle behaviors that was not being represented in the traditional curriculum, right? So, like, for example, there was one participant, and this stuck with me, it always has. She had some sons who she lost to gun violence. And so every time she heard sirens, she wanted to cook. She made her feel like maybe her sons were coming home, or when she cooked, she was cooking for more than one person because she was used to having more than one person there. So that's just an example of like some of the more qualitative, cultural and maybe environmental factors that can contribute to a lifestyle intervention, where if you haven't tailored your intervention, or maybe centered community voice, as Salim was saying, that you wouldn't know to address in a lifestyle intervention, right? So after several projects like that, I was like, okay, for my career, I want to develop an effective lifestyle intervention for this population, and it needs to take a CBPR approach, just so I can keep my finger on the pulse of what's affecting people's lifestyle behaviors as a nutritionist, right? I'm a nutritionist. That's my doctorate is in nutrition. So when I went to Stanford, I actually kind of fell in the black hole with the community a little bit. I did go out and do things personally, but not for my research. But what I did pick up was resilience. Dr. Salim mentioned that also, resilience theory, and how I can categorize stressors and resources of the community without, and I know it's important to name names, but without exactly talking about, for instance, racism and structural racism. I can say, oh, people are stressed by their access to the community, and use the theory to frame it. I use resilience theory and also the socio-ecological model to talk about multidimensional stressors of Black women, but also at the same time recognizing that they have been doing well in spite of all that's going on, So it's like, how can I capture both sides? So that's why I picked up resilience theory. And now that I'm an assistant professor and I'm back in Chicago, now I'm really focusing on connecting back with community organizations and stakeholders that I had built relationships with in graduate school, but I come back in a new way, right? I come back in a new way and say, I'm ready to, in a sense, give back, but uplift community voice with a little bit of more power, different positionality for me. So that was kind of a personal story. I don't know if I did the 10 minutes, but I look forward to your questions, and I'll have to frame them exactly around my experience, because so much has changed, you know, I think with community work just in the last year, but I'm right at that position where I'm starting a new job, and I've got a community group together already. I knew that was what I needed, so I can talk more about the challenges and maybe facilitators to that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Springfield. And I'd now like to welcome Dr. Francisco-Menchavez.
Thank you, Jarita, for organizing this panel. And Dr. Springfield and Salim, thank you for your insights. I wanted to, so my research is with Filipino migrants and using participatory action research. I come to learning about PAR not through the academia actually, but through movement building. I'm an immigrant from the Philippines and am connected with social movements, liberation movements in the Philippines and here in the diaspora, Filipino diaspora. And in those movements, folks taught me that we're always doing research or social investigation in their terms, right? Activists and organizers taught me that people in communities have a right to research, as Arjun Appadurai would say, that research does not only belong to academics and those that have advanced degrees, but actually folks in community are doing that research already. Filipino migrants, and what I've developed in my writing, I call it kwentuhan, and it is a sort of echo from Native scholars' ideas around talk story, Native Hawaiian scholars, Latina scholars, ideas around the kitchen table, and Black feminist scholars talking about you know, the cultural values of just the value of story. Filipino migrants have taught me that, you know, they're already doing research on where is the best, you know, Jollibee, which one it is, which Jollibee is Filipino fried chicken, you know, which one, where is, or who has, which city has a notorious reputation for labor exploitation, which, you know, public transport is best during snow time, right? I got my PhD in New York City, and all of those things were already happening organically. And when I went to City University of New York, the Graduate Center, to get my doctorate degree, and there, academics, professors, students put a name to it, and it was CB PAR and PAR. And so I had a home in urban education where folks were thinking about, how do we talk to young people? How do we involve them in this process? TPAR, you know, how do we involve teachers in participatory research? And I think that I want to say that, you know, doing participatory action research is not easy. It's not simple. It's not messy. I would love to give you like, here's a 10-point checklist and a quick, easy like guide. And it's like, there are those things like Dr. Salim, I love this idea of what are your interests in research and also how does it serve that community? Oftentimes I feel like folks are like, oh, I do PAR and it's all for the community, and that's disingenuous. You have to also have your academic application. We are the scholars who are reading in the literature. We have that those skills, right? And so it does have to be sort of mutually beneficial. And so I think that the three things I want to say about my research and doing it sort of in this community engaged approach is that I'm always, so one, I always wanted to center migrants' experiences in the research, and not just the research, like their voices, but also in the design of the projects. What that means is, you know, doing PAR work with Filipino domestic workers means that I ask them also, what are the questions that are most relevant to you? What are the questions that you feel like I need to be asking? Filipino domestic workers in New York City were the ones that told me that that I couldn't tell their story unless I went home to the Philippines and talked to their families. That folks who, scholars, popular culture production, makers have told their story, but never really considered, sort of bridging the, divide between the families left behind and themselves, right? So I couldn't have come to that decision without migrants letting me know that, hey, look, listen, I love that you want to tell our story, but here's one way you can do it that people don't really consider. The second thing about community-based approaches, I think, is that we have to be in consultation with organizations. And Dr. Springfield, you were talking about this, right? Because building those relationships is not also going to happen overnight, right? You do have to attend events, volunteer, right? Like, I've been in hella, like, I'm the food person, in the events, or, you know what I mean? Like counting every lumpia, like you only get 2 or 3 or 4, you know what I mean? And it is the time that, and that's what I mean about, there's not a real clear cut, like how many months do you have to volunteer in the organization? And then you can kind of reach, like, I want to do research now. I'm not sure how to, there's not a sort of timeline there. But I think in terms of building those relationships, it does take time. And so I want to offer that up to this community to say that I know that you're all in grad school, and definitely there's like the clock is ticking and you can really hear it loud and clear, but I wouldn't look at building relationships with organizations as like separate from the work that you're doing in the coursework. I think it's a part of the process that you're going through. I think the last thing I want to say, just as in my mind as I was sort of jotting my notes down, is I chose to do PAR work with migrants when I didn't really read migrant workers. I didn't really find so many studies that did PAR work with migrant workers. Number one, they're hella busy, like they only have Sundays off, and it's hard to pin them down and things, all of these life conditions. But I do want to say that there is a rising field in participatory action research and in migration studies. Migration Letters, a journal in migration studies, just published a special edition on thinking about migrants and in what ways can they be participatory in creating knowledge. And so the thing that I wanted to offer, the last thing I wanted to offer, is that, Michelle Fine taught me this, that there's PAR deep and there's like PAR light, right? And there are many levels in which we can engage and ask community for participation. They don't have to be there as you're crafting the research methodology. They don't have to transcribe the interviews with you, you know what I mean? There are many different sort of levels of participation that we can all sort of engage them with. Thank you. I'm sure I'm over 10 minutes.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to invite Dr. Arias to share some of his work and approaches to that work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will echo what the other panelists said. It is such a privilege, and for me especially an honor, to be on a panel with these amazing doctors. Some of you actually, remember me while still having recently graduated from Stanford GSE. And so it feels really good to be here representing kind of a bit of a postdoc perspective. And again, I'm very honored to be counted among such amazing scholars. A bit about myself. I'm currently calling in from Ute, Cheyenne, Hickory, Apache land, which is Colorado College. It is really interesting to kind of be going into the Mountain West after having been in the Bay Area for 6 years. And so that's one thing I think that is really like defining a lot of my work right now, is kind of this reset of like, okay, I was doing a lot of things, some with community, some not in community, some, just all the kind of graduate work and then suddenly to just move to a completely new institution is something to think about. But before I get too ahead of myself, my work is largely in education and youth development, positive youth psychology. And so really it's around looking at how outdoor education, environmental education, all of that can be really asset focused and community inspired, as opposed to some of those like traditional separations of environmentalism and environmental justice, right? Or outdoor education, and trying to democratize that, and really thinking about, well, what are the ways in which outdoorsiness and in which environmentalism is actually very much already community centered, right? And thinking about that. So yeah, excited to talk specifically about those kinds of specific education or like outside of education directions. But in terms of like general thoughts, it's amazing because so many of the things that I had wanted to say were already said by my capable panel here. And so I will just stick with like two main things that I'm thinking about, because it really helps me, like it's helped me organize all of these thoughts. One, exactly what everyone was saying. There are different types of community involved research, right? And I think Dr. Francisco-Menchavez was saying it exactly right, that it's like, you can go deep, you can go light. But I would also even say more than just that spectrum is, it's like a Venn diagram of some things are, participatory action research in a community. Some things are community-based or community involved, and those might overlap and those might not. And I think being aware of that nuance, and people have written about these things, right? Like people have written about, is it participatory action or is it not? Being aware of that nuance and being aware of like, what is it that I am doing right now? Or what is it that I and my advisor are doing, right? What is it that I eventually want to do? What is it that I just got this grant money to do, And that's not necessarily to suggest, although I think it's kind of a bit true, but it's not to say that anything that isn't community action, participatory action research is like, don't even do it, like you have to help no matter what, whatever. Because there is like non-participatory action research that is very good, but it is not participatory action, right? And I think it's just really important to reflect on that and say, for instance, okay, with this community that I want to really be with and help and leverage my academic expertise, I eventually want to do community-based participatory action research. And maybe you can't yet, right? Maybe you like do not have the connections or the time, or you have not served enough lumpia, right? And you have not done all of these things. That's okay in kind of a way, right? Of like, you need to build up those relationships. And if you cannot do CVPR in the meantime, quote unquote, it does not mean that like the research is not valid, but it also, again, is not participatory research. And so I think it's just something really, as like scholars that want to be in communities, but also by nature of, being graduate students or academics, like there are some of those barriers or hierarchies, and to pretend that those aren't there is kind of not actually doing that community a service, right? So you need to recognize the benefit you can bring, and also like the humility that you need to have like as you are creating those relationships. That's one thing. Like it takes time, and there are different things you can do as you build those relationships. And then the second thing, and I was really just reflecting on this right now in our times of COVID, what's going on with research, what's going on with academics, with job markets, with all of this stuff, with our communities. And this is me like waxing a bit poetic here on like academia in general, but like so much of research work and so much of community-based research work, I think is tied in with like two things, one being like love and one being fear. And I think, so much is get into these community things because, we love the community, we love the knowledge, we love whatever it is that really brings us joy. But with academia, there's also that, fear of not getting hired, fear of no jobs, fear of, is this community-based research rigorous enough? Do people respect it? Am I going to be able to do these things? And it's much more complicated than this. And I'm not saying like necessarily just like follow your heart and everything will work out well. Like things are very hard, but as you're making decisions about what do you want to research, what do you want to go about and make connections with community, I would say like try as best as possible while being realistic of like following that push of love instead of fear. And so what do I mean by that? For instance, if I do this research, like maybe some institution is not going to hire me. The question I think that gets deeper to that is like, is that an institution that I would want to be working with and working for and spending a lot of my time at if they would not hire me because I did this type of community participatory research, right? If I don't spend enough time with this community, can I like do something quickly and still maybe be able to get it published, right? Like flipping those into what ways am I able to stretch myself as a researcher and help that community in the ways that they need, rather than having it be a fear-based perspective, right? All of that with the huge grain of salt that like, you know, things are very difficult right now. And I think to just say like, everything is fine and all of this kind of research is the same as any other kind of research is not necessarily presenting the full picture. But because of, you know, like because of the sometimes scary situations of research where we're in right now, I think it's all the more important to say like, what are my motivations for doing the work I want to do? And really just being aware of that as you dive into any project. So that's where I will stop right there. Thank you all again.
Thank you. That was really wonderful, Dr. Arias. Thank you so much. Okay, so now as part of the RSVP process, participants asked some questions. So now we're going to some questions that were asked of the panelists before we began today. So first off, one, how do you handle institutional barriers to community-based participatory action research? For example, not having your advisors or department be on board, or difficulty getting academic papers published. How do you handle those sort of institutional barriers? And I'll open up to anyone, any of the panelists who'd like to respond.
I'm happy to start us out and give a couple of my thoughts. I think this is a hard one, right? Because it's challenging when you want to do something that goes against the grain a bit, or if you don't have support for something that you want to do. I think that can be really hard. Some things that come to mind for me are thinking about ways to, find resources and mentors and outlets that value the work that you want to do, right? So I think there is a piece of, it's a delicate balance of making sure that you advocate it if it is something that you want to get experience with, right? So maybe you can't do a full CVPR approach within your study, but like all of the scholars on the panel have been saying, are there pieces of that approach that you could take out and say, okay, I know that here's the scope of my work. I'm sure we could all maybe send a couple of resources if it will be helpful at the end, or looking at papers where, it kind of lays out some foundational approaches and you can say, okay, I want to use these couple of approaches in the work. So I think that's one way, even if you can't do a full scope, approach to this, can you use pieces of it that can start getting you some exposure, getting you some comfort addressing or implementing this type of approach in your work. And then think about, submitting it to a journal that values that approach. You might not have to do that, but right, like again, coming from the field of psychology, there's like a journal of community psychology. And so perhaps your work might be really good in that outlet. You're still hitting your target of needing a publication. You're still maybe doing, work in this area that maybe your advisor supports or that your department supports, but you might push back a bit and say, well, I want to make sure that in this approach, I do these things that are foundational to some of the principles. So that way it can help you, go in that direction. And I also think utilizing resources and which I know we'll talk probably some about resources, but there are different like websites or tools out there that can help facilitate some of that. So those are a couple of thoughts from me.
Jarita, before we move on to the next question, thank you too. I'm saying thank you to Salim. Every time you say something, I'm like, thank you. That was good for me to reflect on as well. I would just like to speak to the other side of that, because now, I don't know if you would view it as the other side, but they asked about institutional barriers, right? So now that everybody's doing social justice work and everybody's anti-racist, everybody's rolling out stuff, everybody wants to talk to the community, I think I found a bit of the opposite effect. And I don't know if I should frame it as the opposite, because it's a barrier as well, because if you all, not that there's not enough room for everybody to, to touch into the community, it is, but I guess echoing what people said before, if you're really clear about why you're doing it, what are you trying to change? You're a health equity, I'm a health equity researcher. So that's always the goal, right? So I keep myself centered in that. And that kind of drives everything. So automatically when I'm partnering with somebody, it's how can we make sure the power is distributed? When I say lift the voices, I mean that through power as well, not just, putting it out there so everybody can hear it. I guess some power comes with that, but being very clear that it's an equitable partnership from the beginning, and then those things kind of naturally follow. So I'm saying with so many people getting in or going down this type of road at this point, it's very clear that everybody it's very important that everybody is clear on what they're doing and why. That way, if you're not doing, like I said, full, and other people mentioned, you're not on that deep level of engaged research, that's okay. Call it what it is. Do not reach, because then, it kind of blurs lines and lanes, I think. So just as a new person, right, at a new institution, and then they're saying, oh, we're doing this and the social justice work, or it's, it's community-based participatory research or action research or decolonization method or whatever you're doing. And they're saying, this is the outcome. And then the methodology is not matching up and the steps are not matching up. And then it's like, oh, you're an engaged person. You should jump on this. And I'm like, not that. I don't know exactly what y'all doing, right? So it's just, that can be a barrier, maybe can be framed as a barrier as well. And I mean, not to put any like shade or negative things on people being interested in doing the work. It's really important, right? I'm in public health. I work in a school of public health. Everybody in public health should be a social justice advocate. If you didn't know that till 6 months ago, that doesn't matter. You know now. I'm glad. Never trying to discourage anybody's participation, but like everybody said, just being clear on coming in, because if people are not clear, it can be a barrier. Okay, thanks.
I think I'm gonna offer two things. There's like a politics of translation. Sometimes when we are talking to community folks about what research is, in the Filipino community, when you say the Tagalog word for research is magsasalik, I mean, it's just like this thing that's very isolating to them. So when we call it kwentuhan, or it's centered around story, then it's not so isolating to them, right? So there's a politics of translation to community folks about what we're doing, but there's also, I feel like, a politics of translation like to academic institutions, whether it be journals, the IRB, your committee members. And I think that there is enough published evidence and scholarship, even in this circle, that we can rely on to put in our dissertation proposals, in our funding proposals, in our IRBs, protocols, to say that, community engaged approaches and PAR or the applied research, things like this, is not just that it's rigorous and it's scientific. And I think showing, I mean, that's like, I'm a sociologist by training. And so sociologists are always like, what's your end? I'm like, that's not how I talk about my research, but if you need to know that, I'm ready with my flow chart. You know what I mean? And being ready, articulating that translation isn't about being not authentic, but it's also acknowledging that those folks need particular terms to understand what your research is going towards, right? And then I want to talk about institutional barriers in community, right? Like I said, approaching Filipino migrants, asking them about their lives and things like that, it can be isolating to them, and they don't sometimes want to do that, especially like if you don't come from that community or something like that. Dr. Monique Guichard in New York City has helped to create the Bronx Community Research Review Board, where, like you said, Dr. Springfield, everybody wants to go into the Bronx now and do a public health research project with community. And I think more and more communities are hip to the fact that researchers are interested in coming in, extracting, and then, not coming back and not being accountable to that community. And so I also want to say that in communities that don't have like the Bronx Community Review Board, where they really assess like, are we going to allow these researchers to come to our community, to our neighborhoods, to interview us and our young people and our elders? I think that that's also something that that ethic of making sure that we translate our objectives, our research aims and objectives to them, to community folks on their terms, is something that we also kind of put on the radar as well.
Good, great, thank you so much. I have another question here, which is, are there any resources you would recommend for students that are new to community-based research? And resources could be articles you found inspiring, books, TED Talks, things your mom told you.
Yeah, totally. And it's actually funny you say that, because I would really say, for people who are still graduate students, or, whether it's early in that graduate career or even later, like talking to other students, other recent grads, people that are doing similar things is the best way of kind of trying to do that resource, because it is an ongoing resource, right? Like they will be able to give you that article or citation or what have you, but then also be in conversation with you. Otherwise, I think Valerie Francisco-Menchavez said, like a lot of fields have their own specific ways of, what seems to be the norm for community-based research, right? And so maybe in psychology, there are different psychology journals around community psychology, right? Or education is definitely big on, right? Or there are different ways of doing formal or informal education, or so there is no lack of those kinds of places. And I would say one last thing is honestly like going and trying to branch out a bit from, not necessarily from like the academic context, but like not peer-reviewed articles or something, but right, blogs or WordPresses or different things that especially young academics are writing about, like, here's how I did this, or like, here is what was really helpful to me. It's such a lazy answer, just be like, just Google that, but right, like it is very possible to do that, right? Like trying to find the stories of younger academics doing that kind of work online is very much there.
I think for one place that I like to go is the Society for Community Research and Action, which I can drop into the chat box. And then there's another article which I can put into the chat box as well, by Dr. Israel. It's a 2010 paper. And I think that is, just trying to get the citation. I think that is a good potential resource too, that I'll add to that list.
Hi, I can add one more. This is a paper, it was a paper by Dr. Shariki Kumanika. And she has a framework for looking at obesity. This is kind of subject matter specific, but it's obesity in African Americans. And she has a model where she thinks about the fact, the identity positionality of the researcher to the field, right? So I'm African American woman. I study African American women. I'm a part of the community that I'm trying to, learn more about. For that specific kind of situation, she has a framework for thinking about that, and I found that really helpful. So I'll just put it in the chat.
I love this. This feels like gift time. Like, here are our gifts to you. Here, I'm going to put something in the chat. The migration letters on special edition around participatory action research and migration from all over the world is in your chat. What also helped me think a lot about PAR work and community engaged work is the public science project at CUNY, the Graduate Center. I hope that we all, Jarita, can we get all these resources? Because I want Dr. Spring, all of the things.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do,
I have to start a reading list for myself also.
So I'm going to compile all these, and I'll send them out in a follow-up email to all the attendees.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then I think the last thing one thing that I've also read, like Dr. Arias was saying, is the National Domestic Workers Alliance. They did a PAR project called like domestic. Anyway, I will put it in the chat. But if you read it through, the methodology, but also the data that they partnered with all kinds of organizations across the country. That was super inspiring to me in terms of rolling out a national level type of like research project that had PAR and communities at the center.
And I happen to think, I think these are all great resources, and I completely agree. I would love to get a copy of the list that we're all coming up with, but I had to make sure that I gave a shout out to a professor at Michigan State, because I went to a workshop, I think last summer. His last name is Dr. Acevedo. And he has a really cool like self-audit tool that I think him and his lab created. So I think if you email him, he'll send it to you. But it's like, one is a self-audit tool to think about for yourself. Like the fact he like lays out the principles of community-based research, and you can self-rate yourself to see where you are. And then he also has like I was trying to quickly Google and look it up. I think there's also an implementation like self-audit tool. So again, you can like get a list of like your implementation methods, and he already lays out everything in the column for you to consider, and then you can rate yourself and then see if there are areas you want to improve on. I thought it was, when he presented it, I thought it was a really cool resource to be able to use and to help you kind of think through different aspects of the project, and thinking through, how much of it is community controlled, how much of it, how much of it is like, science controlled, and then like, where do you fall within that balance? So I definitely would reach out to him, and I can try to find like an informal citation, but I would recommend contacting him, and I think he'll send the documents to you.
Great, those are great, and I am continuing to compile them. So I think this fits in for everyone. So how did you decide to pursue a career in academia versus maybe the nonprofit sector or other career fields?
Tell us who should start, Jarita. I want to be respectful.
You're going to start, Dr. Springfield.
I'm the one who needs to start.
We're going to go Dr. Springfield, then we're going to go Dr. Arias, then Dr. Salim, and then Dr. Francisco-Menchavez.
Okay, awesome. why did I go into academia?
That's right. Versus
Completely,
some other way to serve the community.
right. So completely candid, right? I'm gonna do this. This is like the fam time. Everybody who wants to do community for, work, y'all are the fam. So we're gonna keep it real. I did not, first of all, I just needed some stability in staying in school. I'm first generation college student, so it's like, go to school. I didn't go to school, you go to school. You have the opportunity to go to school, go to school. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just go to school, right? that's the thing. And then as I got into undergrad, I did STEM because they were like, if you do STEM has the most scholarship money. For one, I was trying to get scholarships. They were like, oh yeah, minorities in STEM right now. That's where the most money is. I was like, bet, say no more. Majored in chemistry and biology and computer science. I got a minor in computer science because I was like, say no more, I'm taking all the classes. But during that time, they also had MARC, minority access to research careers for undergraduates like MARC-U-STAR. It's a NIH kind of fellowship pipeline program for underrepresented students, right? And they give a stipend. I was like, oh yes, this is it. So then I started doing summer research opportunities. And then on my last summer, I was in Dr. Angela Odoms-Young's lab, who was my doctoral mentor, right? The nutrition equity lab that I talked about. I did my last internship there. And coming off a basic science background, I think my first project was on the perceived benefits of Qigong in low-income Black men. I was like, what does that have to do with nutrition? I thought I was gonna work out my pipette skills, biochemistry. I was like, what's going on here? And then when I was there, just learning about these men who were taking a Qigong class was one of the most enriching and enlightening experience, and also the love they gave me. So just on some like, there's a sign, I believe in signs and spirit and things, right? There was actually students from Stanford who were working at the community center when I was there. And they were trying to interview the men and the men wouldn't talk to them. It was like, nah, we're not talking to you for 45-minute cognitive interviews. Nope, it's a dub, not doing it. So then I was there and they were like, sis, you went to Grambling? I went to Grambling, that's a HBCU, right? They were like, you went to Grambling, you're in a doctorate program. We're so proud of you. And I was like, for real, I'm trying to get some bread. I had majored in this because I'm trying to get some bread. My mama said, go to school. And they was like, whatever you need, I got you because we are proud of you. And then I did like 7 interviews, right? And I'm the intern. I'm from Grant, I'm straight out of undergrad, right? So then I was like, oh, this is love. This is a job. I can do this. I don't have to be under the hood. No disrespect to my micro folks. Love it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. And then also being from Northern California, I think, and my name is Sparkle, and I just love people. And I thought it was all good. And I learned so much about, racism and health disparities and things. And then that just caught me on a personal level. Like Black people are dying from X, so many different things. There's this narrative of Black communities constantly having, poor outcomes. And when I went to the university and to hear that narrative, like people say Black low income, low education, like it was one word, like it was synonymous. It hurt me because those are the community members that really were, showed me love and were really guiding me in my life. And to hear, don't go there, don't go past that street. And those were all the people that I had connected with. And I was like, they must be missing something from the story, and okay, how do I stay connected with them? And then the community approach provided that approach, to be able to keep that connection and get that reciprocal, relationship. So, and then I found out we don't really make that much bread, but I was already in. So yeah, the fam is proud still, I think, and still trying to, now I'm chasing the work to make that meaningful difference, before I peace out. So
the bread will come, Sparkle, I think.
They keep saying that, but we're waiting. Sparkle, I very much agree. I will also just say, I think in some ways did doctoral program and kept in academia because I wasn't doing something else. You know, it just seemed to make sense. It seemed to make people proud, and was, you know, kept going. And then exactly what you said, you know, you keep getting deep enough and they're like, oh, well, now you're too deep. Now there's not actually any money left. Like you should have stopped at the master's level and then done something else. But no, I think really honestly, there are a lot of paths that are really open and then just kind of a bit obscure. And I know Stanford is doing a pretty good job of, you know, with career centers and you know, non-academic trajectories, really trying to make that open, just because, you know, getting a graduate degree, whether it's a master's, a doctorate, or anything, does not, you know, necessarily imply academia. And I think that's especially important to bring up right now, where academic jobs in a lot of different contexts are changing, right? They are getting harder to find, or not as fulfilling, or not as well compensating, right? Like all of these things. But for me, like I do feel very fortunate because it was still something that I wanted to keep going. One thing that I want to say though is, and this goes back to my like fear versus love type of relationship with the work, is many of you that knew me from, you know, several years back, I actually started in terms of much more educational neuroscience, psychology, like, you know, youth development in schools, and really felt very drained by that. And I was really nervous because I remember thinking, if I don't get my perfect job in what I want to do in that field, I'm really not going to like it. You know, I don't want to do some of these kinds of work in ed neuro or in ed psych stuff unless I get like the exact job that I want. And really was realizing, like, what is a field, what is a space, what is a community, what is a topic that I could get, you know, like any kind of job, even if they're like, nope, there are no academic jobs, you're just gonna have to go and, you know, find something else, that I would be totally okay with doing. And for me, that was, you know, outdoor education, youth outside, trying to do equity in environmental stuff. I was like, even if I literally go back to, you know, a job that I did not need any kind of graduate stuff, I would be okay with that. And that was a signal for me that that seemed like something good to go into. And that's not to say, again, that it's like follow your dreams and do the things, but it's really thinking, you know, what is the kind of work that I want to do, whether it's academic or not academic, whether it is prestigious or not prestigious. Like, you know, what are the things that draw me in, as opposed to, you know, doing it because I'm like running away from something else. And that is a good signal of saying, like, this would help fulfill me, even if it's not that I get the 1 in 400 chance of getting that academic job. Because that is the reality, right? Like, many people won't get that first ideal thing. And I think for us, on the one side of being very community minded, but on the other side, you know, right now, and I'm broad strokes here, but right, we are in academic context, right? We are either graduate students or, you know, research members or young academics. So we're not necessarily like fully on the front lines, and that's something to be aware of, right? Like we are not out there doing the full on community work. And so the question is, where in that nexus between academics and community do I want to keep pushing, even if it gets really hard? And that is, I think, where you can find a lot of energy to do things with joy, as opposed to do things and really, really hope that they work out, you know.
Yeah, I was thinking and reflecting on this too. I think both Dr. Springfield and Dr. Arias hit a lot of good points and things to reflect on. So I too was debating about what would be the best space for me. So I did not say like, I, you know, want to be a tenure track assistant professor my whole life, right? So, you know, I was a McNair Scholar at Georgia State University in Atlanta for my undergraduate degree. That was my first exposure to psychology and research. And so I was like, oh, cool. Like there's this, you know, you can get a PhD in psychology and do research on things you're interested in. Okay, great. And then from there kind of went through and decided like, okay, I think I want to do this. So, you know, went through the motions of like what it takes to get into grad school. And through grad school, I intellectually like the idea of like coming up with questions and trying to solve and answer questions, especially for thinking about Black and Brown communities and thinking about communities where there is less access or there's more risk factors for different reasons, right? So like thinking about the fact that there's this whole system of like racism that exists that has real life implications for people's, health, well-being, mobility. And so I like thinking about solutions to problems. And I also like people, right? And you don't have to like people to be in academia. So, it can be a really isolating and a place that you go if you don't like people as well. So I think that I saw professors on that spectrum. I saw professors that were like, super to themselves and like in their office all the time, didn't have a lot of interaction, did great research. And I saw professors on the like across the spectrum, all the way to like super charismatic and social and like all in the community a lot. And I gravitated more towards that side. I mean, I think I found myself often kind of like either in the middle or pulling a lot more towards the side where it's like, I do like people and I want to make sure that my work has an impact. And so I was in the place in graduate school where I was really struggling with like, in academia, will my work be able to make an impact? I questioned that a lot, right? And I talked to some mentors about it and they said, Farzana, you can find a way to make it work or to try to make it work for you in the academy, right? So if you are intentional, I think like Dr. Arias was saying about like that intersection, like, okay, there is this intersection where if I decide to go the route of academia, what would that look like? Like where, because you have the autonomy once you are done with grad school to say, this is what I want for my career, or this is where I need to start because of these reasons, whatever, like, sometimes financial reasons dictate that too. But you have the choice to be able to control a bit more where you want to go and what you want to do once you have the PhD behind your name. And so I think being thoughtful about it it's hard as you're going through the motions of the grad program, because it can take so much out of you. And a lot of times you're just like focused on like the next thing, the next hurdle, the next deadline. So by the time sometimes when it comes up to like, oh, I'm almost done, job time, you're like, wait a second, what am I doing next? So I don't know that programs always give grad students the space to sit, to like pause for a second and like reflect. And so I think for me, I decided that I enjoyed research. I like the idea of thinking, and I like that my work I'm doing the work that I want to do, like with the communities I want to do it with. And I do have the autonomy to try to make my work community engaged as well. I haven't, none of my studies have been kind of straight up, community-based participatory research as, it's laid out in a lot of articles. So I recognize that those folks might be like, well, you don't do full, CBPR work. And I haven't been able to do that, but I feel confident and comfortable with the space that I'm in right now. And I think at this point in my academic career, it's a compromise between this is the job I decided to pursue, and here are the personal values that I have, and something I personally think is an asset and brings value not only to the university that, if you chose the academic route, the university that you're working at, whether or not to me they see it, the university behind your name as you're doing good community-based work, I think is an asset, because then community members where it's hard to have trust sometimes can say, oh, there's a professor who's really, really engaged with us, it brings resources, support, helps, and that piece of making sure you aren't just doing research and like dipping out and never reporting back. I think that it helps universities whether or not they see that. So I think finding where you have the most comfort and knowing that that can change throughout your career, it can be helpful too, right? So some professors say, oh, once you get tenure, even though that might sound like far away for folks who might want to do it, you can do all these things. I think, yeah, maybe to a certain extent. And you can also figure out, how do I start doing some of the things that I value anyways? Because personally, I have to know that my work is having some sort of direct impact to feel a sense of purpose. And so, yeah, I can write papers and, push out papers in good journals. And I will sacrifice some of my time to make sure I go back to schools and like at least do a presentation for teachers, or do something like making sure I'm also serving as I'm asking them to give, and also thinking about it as a partnership, right? So I'll shut up because I think I'm talking for a long time, but I think it's a good question and it's a hard one. So I'll pause there.
I also think it's a hard question. I think that I really echo Dr. Salim, Dr. Arias, what you were saying about finding the thing that brings you joy, and the academia often doesn't bring me a lot of joy. But it also challenges me a lot. I, just like Dr. Springfield, Dr. Salim, I was also in a program in undergrad that created a pipeline for students of color to explore graduate school. And right out of SF State, I went to get my doctorate. Did not know what that meant. But I did know that it was my community. It was like the organizers and movement builders who were also proud of me, who said that you can go to grad school and you can also be here with us and contributing to our work. And I think I had examples of that. My mentor, Dr. Robin Rodriguez, was getting her doctorate at Cal and was at rallies with me. And I was like, oh, you could do both. Like that's an example of how you can put your, that question, like, for whom are you doing this research? Are you doing it, just that question, for whom, right? For whom does it serve to do this work, to, uncover this theory or test this concept? How does it serve our community? That question was asked to me a lot. And I think it invited me to say, okay, I can do this academic track and also stay connected with community, stay connected in political organizing work. Like I said earlier, I'm Filipino American. So I came here when I was 9 and lived most of my life here in the United States. So I'm a border crosser in my body. And I think that the border between nonprofit and academia, social movements and academia, I want to hold that intention in my body too, to say that, I think that there are some ways in which my scholarship, my research, that I can think together with community folks producing political theory to advance political struggle. I think that also I chose academia because I see the classroom as a possible site of disruption. And I teach at SF State. My teaching, I won't even tell you my teaching load because, it's kind of scary, but I see that part of my work as an academic as one that's generative for me. Right now, I also have 2 young children. And so I cannot have a personality that I did when I didn't have responsibility of care for other people's lives. And so my students are one way that, building my research group is one way that I do my sort of par-light kind of design and methods. And so to me, those things really spoke to me and one of the reasons that give me joy. And I want to thank Dr. Arias for, inviting us to think about love and joy and passion in this conversation, because oftentimes when we're talking about academia, it's so like bereft of that. And so I'll stop there for this question.
Thank you so much. So now I'd just like to open it up to anyone who is here with us right now if they had a question that they wanted to ask the panelists directly. And if you just want to use either the raise hand function or you can just unmute yourself, I will look up for you. And if there's no questions from the audience, I'll go back to the ones that we had there, but just wait for a few seconds to see if anyone here had a question they wanted to ask directly. Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm going to, but if you do have one, you can just message me. So how do you, you've decided to stay in academia, everyone, or for the moment. And some of that involves like going to new communities. Dr. Arias just talked about moving from California to Colorado. Any advice for reaching out cold to organizations that maybe you admire and want to work with about possibly collaborating with them?
Are we starting the rotation over?
Sure.
No, I'll say, I think first of all, go to the meetings, or if you know, like if they're having a meeting or somebody, who knows somebody, relationships, go to events that the organization may be having. That was one of the things that I always did, was just to go to your community, like if there's town halls, or I don't know if you live in the community you work in. If you don't, travel there and see what's going on, be in community. So that's most of what I did in Chicago, was go to events, and then just from talking to people, and again, being clear about your interests and the population that you're trying to serve and exactly what you're trying to change, then you can sometimes find like minds, and I've had people be extremely helpful with linking me, like, oh, you're interested in this, you know who you should talk to? That's always a good sign. If you're talking to somebody and they say, who you should talk to, follow up on those. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add with that and actually connect. I think I just saw Shivani's question, right? I was part of a CBPR program in India and moved here. What would you recommend to continue such work in a new context? So that might be a different question, right? Of like kind of similar work in a new context, or in this thing of like just making, new connections or new things. Like we mentioned before, like on one thing, it takes time, right? But that's not to say that all those things aren't generative as that time is being built, right? I'm thinking about, I was teaching an environmental justice class at Stanford, and even with one of the community partners, I was like, I have nothing for you except, excited students and a little bit of time, and that's it, right? Like, so it wasn't this very full introduction of like, this is going to be the best participatory action project, and it's going to like absolutely help your community for years to come. It was very much like, I'm teaching a class, we got some students, they're excited, what can we do, right? And so, and that started small, and then the next year it was like, okay, like let's do something else. And exactly what Dr. Springfield said, they were like, oh, but do you know this person? And it's those contacts that kind of build your web of people and thoughts and possibilities, right? And my dissertation project, which ended up being like a full case study of a group, like that took me, let's call it like 4 years to actually like get into its full shape and get into effect. And that started all the way at the very beginning of like, hey, I'm a graduate student, do you all need any help, right? And like that was, and then 4 years later it becomes something else. So I think it's just being very open to opportunity, right? And showing up and recognizing that the showing up might not be enough, right? Like you will not do enough for whatever community or individuals that they need, because the universe does not revolve around just you and your work. And so like it is bigger than you. And so just starting small and having that trust of making connections, I think is how to start it, right? Knowing to start small.
Yeah, just building on those things, I completely agree. I think, yeah, recognizing that it takes time to build trust in. And so I I just moved to a new area, right? So I'm new to the Bay Area, and one of the things that I did recently was I created an Excel document. Like I looked up organizations around the Bay Area that focus on the things that I personally and professionally care about. And starting with that list, I'm going to decide, where I want to, like what places I want to first contact in terms of like just getting to know the organization, understanding a bit about them, telling them a little bit about me, and then deciding if I, where places do I want to volunteer my time. And you can decide depending on what your needs are. Some people might be in a position where they can like just start volunteering. Of course, saying that I have this, here are some ideas I have, but I want to get to know the organization better first. Do you mind if I spend some time serving, and then thinking about, are there ways that we can, that my ideas or, my ideas can help support you all. And so that way you get a chance too to volunteer time, get to know people, have it happen naturally, and then think through together throughout that time. Like, oh, I noticed that this is how you all are doing this piece of, this piece, I have some other ideas. Do you want to chat about it? I think, and it's, keeping that level, kind of equitable, equal power sharing piece in, recognizing that these folks are the experts in their own experiences within their community, and taking that information in, I think is really important and helpful. And then, they will recognize like, okay, well, maybe you have some knowledge, some things that might be able to help us too, right? So it's an exchange. And I also recognize that some people might not have that time to serve that long. But I do think being patient with yourself and being patient and recognizing if there is some hesitation, if there is some resistance, I'll just quickly say there was a community-based organization in LA before I left last year that I wanted to partner with. I got a community-based grant where psychologists essentially would take their research knowledge and then do something to serve like on the ground communities through the translation of research. And so we started with one organization, and they were very hesitant because we kind of needed to move fast for the grant. And both myself and my collaborator recognized that it's hard because sometimes academia puts constraints on how things should be in terms of building the trust, building the relationship. And that collaboration didn't work out. We did volunteer our time and we gave a workshop on a topic that would be helpful to their staff. And we shared that this was our kind of goal and the purpose of the grant, but it didn't work out, and that's okay. So I think recognizing that sometimes partnerships won't work out because it doesn't always align with what the Academy's timeline is. That doesn't mean you can't go back and serve and maybe think about a project later down the line. But I think giving yourself some space and some grace to recognize some partnerships might work and some might not, and that's okay.
Great. Okay, well, we're just almost nearing the end of our time here, but there is one here, a question from Emily in the chat, which was, how do you identify institutions that you think will be supportive of this kind of research, participatory action research, community-based research? What are sort of like institutional traits that you look for when you're looking to engage with institutions? Dr. Francisco, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think about my first tenure, like I got my doctorate degree in New York, and my first tenure track job was in Portland, and then I came back from the Bay. Dr. Springfield, you and I share the Bay, Bay representatives over here, really was always trying to come back to the Bay. But like Dr. Salim, I ended up in Portland and I was starting fresh. And I think it was really organizations who had a prior track record of partnering with even other organizations on projects. A willingness to collaborate is one flag to me that tells me that an organization is willing to sort of think through their political or organizational programming with collaboration. So to me, that's Dr. Salim's like Excel sheet. That is like the way to go. And then like one of the columns is like, what kinds of collaborations have they done? And does that sort of line up with some of my values and the skills that I bring to a collaboration, a partnership?
Yeah, if I can just add quickly, that also gets into this interesting tension of, right, like what we mean by community, for instance, or what we mean by, right, the people, because first, that's super amorphous, as it should be. But, right, like, does that mean that you are working with an institutionalized group that says, like, if you help us, you are helping the community? Because sometimes that can be really good, and it can also be, like, for instance, with education, right? Or you're working with students, or you're working with the nonprofit that says they're helping the students, because that's always, right, very different sometimes. But at the same time, those institutions have that longevity. It has that, they know the people around in the actual, like, geographical space. They're going to be there even after, like, students or community members that are busy and have other things, like, even as that rotates. So I think it's balancing, what is going to give you that institutional knowledge and what is going to be able to give you a longevity of connection versus maybe what is very authentically, on the ground. Like, here are people that are, have less voice, right? Or have, as Dr. Springfield was saying, like, who am I trying to elevate here, right? It is very often institutionalized groups, but not inherently, right?
Yeah, can I add a small piece to that? I should have said it earlier. Leverage the time. Like I said, I was talking about a lot of schools, being more interested too in social justice. Like there's a lot of rollouts, a lot of strategic visions where schools are taking inventory of the roots, the connections that they have to the community. So probably there may be a list or something floating around of people who are engaging community, like in their work, different faculties. So just see, what, like exactly what Dr. Arias was saying, like who is already working with the community, or what are those organizations that have a relationship and what have they done in the past? And then also what is that relationship? Like, how did it go? Was it, did it go well? What is the feeling of the institution to the community and vice versa? Do they feel like, they've been taking for years and they're changing, or is it a good relationship? Like, to definitely check out the landscape of what's existing, and then you can see, where you fit in, or if you want to build something new, if you want to join something that's already going on. Say that.
Awesome. Well, I just wanted to wrap up today's session by just saying thank you. And if everyone could do some e-claps, I think for me, this was like a really exceptional panel and really wonderful to hear these 4 distinct approaches that I think were very complementary to each other. And it was really wonderful and personally inspiring session. So I'm really grateful to be a part of it. I will send an email with the recording of the lecture as well as a link to the feedback. If you enjoy hearing from Black, Indigenous, Latinx scholars, if you want us to continue this kind of work, getting feedback is really important and helps us to continue to make these sort of programmatic choices that we're making that are very intentional. So please support us by filling out that feedback and giving us some good comments there to help us improve and refine our offerings for the rest of the year. So I want to just say thank you to our panelists, Dr. Salim, Dr. Francisco-Menchavez, Dr. Arias, and Dr. Springfield. It's really a joy to be able to listen to you and hear more about your work. Our next session will be on March 9th. Our poster will be coming out right away. It's an all women, all Indigenous panel on after the data collection. So I hope to look and see many of the people here today again. So thank you so much to everyone and wish you a wonderful Black History Month and a wonderful rest of February. So thank you so much.